The new God of War DLC, God of War Ragnarok Valhalla, brings back a few Grecian gits from the original trilogy.
Great!
Since Valhalla is a free DLC, the sheer amount of older enemies brought back from the OG games surprised a lot of people, and has led to speculation that maybe these guys are assets from a secret God of War Trilogy remake Sony Santa Monica may be working on. As enticing as the idea sounds on paper, a trip back to ancient Greece would be a bad next step for Kratos, and I've got 2 Titan-sized reasons why that's the case.
You are cruel and arrogant and selfish.
I get it. Somewhere in the 50 hours you've spent looking at this man's godlike arse as he wrecks raiders and decapitates Drawker, you've probably had the bright idea it would be fun to play the OG games with the new modern mechanics. Wrong! The original God of War games have a massive scale and operate on an almost non-stop pace where epic music is constantly blasting, you're always surrounded by dozens of enemies, and ultimately you are made to feel like a pasty Terminator. Now compare that to...
I learned how it felt to make her laugh, and suddenly I felt more at ease. A calm within each other's storms, I suppose.
They had a way of describing that. Peace dwells among us.
Lovely, brother.
Let's be clear, I'm not dunking on modern God of War here, but pointing out it's a very different type of game. The strength of modern God of War games is in its writing and characters. The new games have an intentionally slower pace, and the gameplay loop of meandering exploration, smaller skirmishes, and constant chatter between your companions is all in service of the story. The tighter camera angles and fewer enemies on screen work together to sell the idea this is a different Kratos than we're used to. It's a Kratos who is mastering control, one who is fighting with discipline and purpose. He's no longer a vengeful god on an out-of-control rampage. So do you see that immediately the new God of War mechanics are at odds with the old God of War's tone? If you were put in charge of remaking the original games from the ground up and looking to add value, this probably isn't the best way to do it. You want to pull the camera back to show off the overwhelming monstrosities Kratos is going to conquer. You want the button-mashing, whirling blades of chaos to make Kratos feel like a fiery Beyblade out of control. If I'm Sony Santa Monica and I'm tasked with adding value to a God of War remake, I'm looking at the fancy mocap stages and equipment, and I'm thinking let's elevate the storytelling of the originals. Let's make them more cinematic. Let's create a more cohesive narrative that bridges the gap between the two stories, because that's what my studio is good at now. But the honest truth is that would be absolute sacrilege to many fans of old school God of War. This is where things could get messy for a team that, to their credit, has already pretty deftly and successfully handled the transition from the old games to the new ones. Just imagine being in the design meetings where they're debating whether or not to scrap QuickTime events. Specifically the sex QuickTime events. And you have to ask yourself, is this a can of worms we really want opening? You've already got the original God of War creator David Jeff making headlines over not liking the direction the franchise is taking, and I already see what kind of hell will be raised over any changes, no matter how well intentioned. For the love of God, nonsense culture wars have already ruined Last of Us discourse. Please, do not take away God of War from me as well. If you are a big fan of the new games, the good news is that the free DLC we mentioned at the top of the video, God of War Ragnarok Valhalla, already does a fantastic job of getting Kratos to take an introspective look at many of his actions from the original trilogy. Valhalla isn't any old basic roguelike just resting on remixing Ragnarok's combat. Instead, it's a full-blown epilogue to the main game. Hearing old man Kratos talk about things like leaving his daughter in the Elysian fields, the consequences of his war against Olympus, and even the bloody boat captain already helps elevate the older games, but does so without whipping older fans into a feathered frenzy and having some of them screech "Retcon! Retcon!" like demented crows.
There is no forgiving you. You chose!
Personally, I think remaking the older games is just a redundant task, especially for Sony Santa Monica. Ragnarok leaves the franchise in a really exciting place. We already know the Norse saga was condensed into 2 games because they didn't want to take 15 years to tell a single story. I don't think Sony Santa Monica should waste that time gained retreading old ground. Ragnarok has one of the best post-games in gaming, setting up all manner of delicious narrative future hooks, like Kratos' new motivation, Atreus' journey to find the other giants, the green tear in reality, which is the same spooky shade of green as Athena, and the absolute state they left Sindri in. The Norse saga may be over, but I don't think we're done with these characters by a long shot. They made what felt like 20 Greek God of War games, and by the time Ascension came out, fatigue was really hitting hard. The last thing on my mind when I finished Ragnarok was, boy oh geez, I hope we can go back to Greece again soon. For what it's worth, I don't really believe a few old enemies popping up in Valhalla is a sign remakes are coming. Most of them do seem to be fancy reskins of their Nordic counterparts. On the other hand, since we started making this video, even more rumours have started circulating that a God of War Trilogy Remaster might be in the works, spread by someone called Nick from Xbox Era, who, from what I've read, has an uneven track record when it comes to these sorts of rumours, so who knows. Remake, remaster, and reimaginings are also terms used so interchangeably these days, even if the rumours are true, we have no clue what the final product might be. Let's make a compromise. Considering only God of War 3 is available to play on PS5 without game streaming, I think ports or simple graphical remasters handled by someone other than Sony Santa Monica would actually be a really great outcome. Let Sony Santa Monica focus on new stories and the future of the franchise, while someone else puts in the legwork to get old school God of War games on PS5 for those who want to revisit it. But that's all just my opinion. What do you think? Maybe I'm barking up the wrong wool tree. Would you enjoy the older games remade with Ragnarok's modern mechanics? Or do you agree with me? Is it time to leave Kratos' blood-soaked backstory in the past and let it fade away into myth and legend while he steps forward with his sandals into the future? Let us know what you think. Now, I know this has been a particularly hard Fimbulwinter for everyone. If you're finding the biting cold more difficult to deal with than an ornery Ormstunga, then buy one of our cozy jumpers from the Ugly Sofa store. For more top video game content discussing all the big games and news in 2024, remember to subscribe to the award-winning Ugly Sofa Gaming, mash the like button as if you're young Kratos trying to score with Aphrodite, and why not leave us a little comment below.